Welcome to Focus on Abilities, a program about issues affecting the lives of people with disabilities. My name is Lex Frieden. I'm Senior Vice President at TIRR, the Institute for Rehabilitation and Research, and I'll be your host for today's program. We have a wonderful guest here with us today, and I'll introduce her as soon as I ask this question, one which we'll answer before the end of today's program. What federal agency is responsible for providing and assuring the opportunity to have home and community-based services for eligible people with disabilities? It's a long question, but we'll get to the answer before the end of today's program. Now it's a pleasure for me to introduce Melissa Hulbert. Melissa is the director of the Community-Based Programs Division at the Centers for Medicare and Medicaid Services in actually Baltimore, Maryland. Most of us would think of CMS being in Washington, D.C., but Melissa, thanks for being here today.
Thank you so much for having me.
Now, your job involves more than community-based services. You're responsible for a whole division of folks at CMS. What really do you do?
That's a very good question. What we do at CMS is that we're responsible for working with our friends in the states who actually run state programs affecting individuals that are eligible for Medicaid. And when I talk about people eligible for Medicaid, the group that we really concentrate on are individuals who have long-term needs. So it's individuals with disabilities, as well as aging individuals who are over the age of 65 who have certain chronic care needs. And what we try to focus on in our group is how to really bring about services for those individuals that allow them to remain in the community and as independent as possible, and really building state systems and service delivery systems that really allow that to happen, and really kind of build systems of care that focus on the individuals themselves. So how we actually do that, there's a variety of things that we do, but it's really trying to develop policies and programs that really get towards that goal.
Okay, so your main job then is to manage a group of people who are responsible for developing those policies and the programs that states then use to help people in their states. That's
correct, and I think don't want to take too much credit, because I think we work with the folks in the states, particularly in the state of Texas. We work with the state Medicaid agency as well as others to develop those programs. We set certain federal standards, but really rely on the input of individuals in those communities to help us shape those programs.
Well, in reality, I suppose that your role stems from the fact that the federal government appropriates dollars
Correct.
That go back to the states, and it's your job to make sure the states get and use those dollars according to the federal intent.
Correct. That's absolutely correct. And I think our role has been evolving over time, in that we have been much more of a, I think in the past, been a regulatory agency trying to establish those policies, and I think we try to incorporate into our role now a lot more often is some outreach to really get some feedback as to how federal policies really have an impact on those communities.
Yeah, I noticed you've used the word partnership several times with respect to the states, and I think that's a constructive paradigm.
Good. Yeah, we think so as well. I think it's a challenge in trying to establish the parameters of that partnership, because I know we don't always make the states happy and vice versa, but it's something that we have to continually work at.
Well, I guess people have to understand their respective roles.
Correct.
To the extent that you can have a partnership and a collaborative approach to meeting human service needs, it has a better impact on the clients.
Correct. And I think it's important because while our agency and the Medicaid program itself is a large funder of the services that I spoke of, we're not the only ones out there. There are a lot of not-for-profits and a lot of state programs that are doing tremendous things, and it's how we can really build that partnership to leverage resources to reach out to a wider community than we would be able to do individually.
Now, the job you do in Baltimore, and that's where CMS offices are.
That's correct.
That job involves managing a division of people. How many people are responsible to you?
In my division, there's 14 people at the current time, and we operate within a bigger group of individuals where we interact with about 100 people.
I see. And before you started your current job, what were you doing?
Well, I have to say that I am a long-term federal employee. Long-term, I would say, is I've been there about 11 years, and at the same agency. And the agency itself is relatively large. We administer both the Medicare and Medicaid programs, so there's an opportunity to move around quite a bit. So I've been with CMS about 11 years and worked in a variety of areas.
What attracted you particularly to this job you're doing now with community-based services?
Well, I think I've always had an interest and a passion for, I think, community-based services and trying to help individuals, I think basically stemming from personal experience, working with your own family members, of trying to help individuals get the services that they need that really help them remain in the community and keep them as independent as possible. And I think it's a fascinating field. So just always had an interest.
Fascinating, but very challenging.
Absolutely. Well, that's always very exciting.
You talked about families dealing with issues of long-term care. Mm-hmm. And in our society, it happens to children of aging parents, and often parents need long-term care.
Correct.
They have chronic conditions that require them to have assistance in their lives. Sometimes we have children who have disabilities, some caused by trauma, some by developmental causes. And this whole population, it seems to me, has been mixed historically with the population of people who we expected to live in nursing homes at the end of their lives. Is that the way you see it as well?
Yes, absolutely. And I think it's been an interesting dynamic. I think it's an important point to make, in that when you really speak about community-based services, I think most people tend to think of trying to serve elderly individuals and trying to get them perhaps out of a nursing home and try and remain in their homes. But the population that we are really serving is very diverse. I think you articulated that very well. And I think what is an interesting challenge is trying to build systems of care that really are able to address the needs of all those different individuals. Because while there are certainly some common features to what those individuals might need, there's also a great deal of diversity. And it's really trying to create some operational, administrative structures that can really meet the needs.
Well, and I guess that is a huge undertaking. I mean, it seems to me that historically, communities built little homes for people who needed assistance. Mm-hmm. And people in the community worked in those homes, and they were operated in a very familial kind of almost rural environment. And people were cared for, in effect, by family members who were working there, or the members of neighboring families who worked in the nursing homes. And the society then growing evolved, and many of these places became almost institutional in nature, mm-hmm. where you didn't know the people who were caring for you, and they were almost mechanical in the sense that people would come to work there and not really have an interest in the people they were serving. And we've seen a lot of negative results of that kind of care. Mm-hmm. Is this community-based service initiative a kind of reaction to that, or is it something we should have recognized in the beginning and simply missed?
Well, I think that there was probably certainly a recognition of that changing social dynamic, and that our society changed, and that families now live all over the place. There aren't necessarily all those informal supports. But I think we also have to recognize that I think the needs of our population has changed. We're an aging society, creating, I think, some additional pressures that we didn't otherwise have in the past. So the needs placed on our service delivery systems have certainly evolved. And I think there was always that recognition, but trying to change that system of care is, I think, very difficult. And there's lots of reasons for that. And I think we're just starting now to make some significant inroads into really how to make our system more responsive.
Do people in Washington, from your experience, Melissa, mean, I know you and your immediate colleagues do,
Mm-hmm.
but I wonder if policymakers whom you work with and interact with really understand the significance of the aging baby boom generation as it relates to these kinds of services.
I think there is great recognition, and people understand really the need to make some changes. But I think what's difficult is trying to have some consensus and agreement about what those changes should be and how they should happen, because let's face it, that there is an existing system of care that has certain stakeholders and interest groups involved, and trying to forge some of those changes is difficult, I think, for a lot of people to accept.
Well, if we had the resources to construct a parallel system and then phase out the one which we expect wouldn't be as effective as the other, it would be a lot easier, wouldn't it?
That's certainly been an argument made by a lot of people, that it's very difficult to transform the existing system while still trying to maintain a certain level of service. But you're right, it's a very costly and administratively burdensome endeavor to consider.
One approach that the federal government has taken to hasten that is to hasten the change is to initiate a series of grant programs
Mm-hmm.
where states essentially compete for and apply for funds to develop options to the
Right.
current more institutionally organized system, and you're responsible really for managing that system, those grants.
That's correct. It's a program that we are very excited about. We operate a program entitled the Real Choice Systems Change Grants. And I think the name itself is very symbolic of what we're trying to accomplish. Trying to, I think, help with, again, our partners to build more responsive systems of care that meet the needs and the choices that individuals want to make, and how they live in the community. So we, under this program, thanks to congressional support, we have been able to award approximately $200 million over the last 4 years to all 50 states. And the goal of the grant is to give states some financial resources that they can use to assess their own state's needs with respect to changing their service delivery systems, and then also start to begin to fund some of those changes, because, as you said, states are under a lot of pressure to operate their existing systems, and don't have the financial resources they need to start building new systems of care or changing their existing systems. So that's what these grants are really intended to do, to be an infusion of funds to really help push states along in trying to make some of those important changes to their care systems.
Well, I'd like to talk some about what some of the states have done, whether
Sure.
you feel like the states are actually making progress doing this, and how this kind of initiative can become the standard of practice rather than simply a demonstration. And we'll do that. I want our audience to stay tuned. We're going to take a short break here from Focus on Abilities, but we'll be right back with more from Melissa Hulbert. Please stay tuned.
If your brother takes from you, you give to him. And if he slanders you, you sing his praises. But if he ever messes with Texas, pray for him, brother. Pray for him. Pray for him.
Welcome back to Focus on Abilities. I'm Lex Frieden, your host, and we're here today with Melissa Hulbert. We're actually filming on site at the Hotel Intercontinental in Houston near the Galleria. And Melissa, you're here came in from Baltimore today and tomorrow for a meeting that we're having on the future of systems change and long-term care programs. Have you found this an interesting meeting?
I've found it absolutely fascinating. It's such a nice opportunity to actually get out of Baltimore and come and meet with other like-minded individuals who work within the same human service delivery system, yet within a different state and really hear from them what their experiences are in trying to make some significant inroads in making changes within their state systems.
Yeah,
So,
it must be hard to be doing all of the work that you do in a closed environment. This must be very inspiring and helpful to get the perspective. And here we have people from several different states.
correct.
People with disabilities who are users of the services, people who are direct service providers, as well as policy people at the state level. It's a great mix of people from my perspective.
And the dialogue has just been so informative because we don't pretend to know everything, certainly, back in Baltimore. And we just find discussions like this so informative to helping us trying to make the right decisions about how to set policy and programs.
Some of these people don't seem shy about telling you what they think you ought to be doing either.
No, it's been a little overwhelming at times, but everyone's been very polite. So it's been good, and it's very funny too. I always say when you work for the federal government and you come out to a meeting like this where there's a lot of other state individuals who certainly have certain opinions about how we set their standards, you've got to have some tough skin because while it's not personal, they just are raising concerns. But it's been wonderful. People have been very helpful.
But it does also give you an impression of what they have to deal with. In effect, the state people are kind of moderators. On the one side, the federal government is setting certain requirements and standards
Correct.
and providing some funding. On the other side, they have consumers with needs that may or may not be entirely consistent with the way the federal policymakers viewed this program. So it must be a challenge for the state people.
Absolutely. I have so much respect for our friends in the states because I think while all of us I think have certain challenges, they're often caught in the middle between the requirements that the federal government likes to set, but also then trying to relay that in a meaningful way to the states and make a difference, or to the constituents within their states, and make that really useful to them. So they are certainly challenged. They're definitely caught in the middle.
Now, at ILRU, we're providing a good bit of technical assistance
Yes.
thanks to sponsorship from CMS to many of the states who are working on this grant program. And I've been able to see remarkable progress made in particular states. I always find it interesting to travel outside Texas. I find that the culture is different in some states, particularly in the Midwest and in the Northeast, than here in the South. But I see progress all over. I mean, a neighbor state of ours, New Mexico, is doing some really innovative kinds of things in terms of long-term care for aging people and people with disabilities. Here in Texas, we've been pioneering some approaches
Absolutely.
at the state level. In the state of Maine, Wisconsin has for a long, long time been a pioneer, and it's also interesting in states like Wisconsin and Minnesota that have been doing these things for a long time. They still acknowledge and recognize they have a long way to go before they reach the vision that we share about having a society where people with special needs can live in their homes.
Absolutely, and I think, again, coming to a meeting like this, and because we certainly, when we're back in Baltimore, we have certainly talked to a lot of the grantees on the phone, and we certainly read some of their reports about some of the progress that they've been able to make, and quite frankly, a lot of the challenges that they still face. But at a meeting like this, to really kind of be able to kind of delve in deep and kind of see what their real remaining challenges are has been very helpful. And I couldn't agree more. While I think there still is so much more to do, we have states that have made tremendous strides in really trying to change their systems of care from one being institutional based to community, more of a community focus, and really trying to change their systems of care from one that has been largely driven by providers, groups, to one that really tries to focus on the individual and trying to provide their services and really not only provide services but also ensure that those services are of a certain quality. So we have been very pleased with some of the progress that's been made and hope to continue down this road.
I think from a practical standpoint, and to help our viewers understand how these kinds of programs may have an impact on them and their families. The reality of the situation is many states before this grant program really had a single option for people who were eligible for Medicaid and needed long-term care services.
Correct.
And that was to find a vacant spot in a nursing home and to move there.
Correct.
And what we're trying to do is develop programs that will support people in their own homes,
Absolutely.
that will enable them to receive the care they need without moving into any kind of an institutional or quasi-institutional environment, and to assure choice. I mean, I think that's
Yes.
another point that
Very
sometimes
important point.
gets lost. We're not trying to remodel the system and make radical change in the sense that facilities for people who may want to reside in those facilities are gone.
Correct.
But at this point, not many people have choices to stay in their own homes if they wish to, and we need to develop an infrastructure of services to allow that, right?
Absolutely, and I think, again, I think we are trying to make some important strides in that way, and I don't think up until very recently have we invested a significant amount of time and resources in that effort. And I think these grants, as well as some other initiatives that we have underway, have been able to, I think, make some important strides in that way. And I think some of the things that have been very helpful, just to talk about a few, is that we, under this program, think about trying to ensure individuals who want to remain in the home get the personal assistance services that they need to really kind of help them with doing their chores. Do they need help with mobility, getting in and out of bed, getting dressed in the morning, and making sure that that those services are available, but not only that, but that the quality of those services are up to par, because I think we certainly have a great need in that area. And some of the other things that we've been really thinking about is not only the expansion of services, but how do you ensure that an individual who might have certain needs doesn't have to go to 5 or 6 different care providers in order to get their needs met, especially an individual who might be limited in mobility. Where can they go, perhaps to one place, and be assessed for the services that might be provided from a multitude of players, and not have, I think, you don't have, so somebody has some service needs, they're not being directed by 4 different people about what their needs are.
Yeah, it can be a real puzzle for the consumer because they may need assistance, but they may have to go here and yon and each place they stop, they may be told, okay, we can give you this, but not that, or
Correct.
You're at the wrong door, you need to go down the street. And every time for people with disabilities in particular,
Right.
People who need assistance getting to these places, it just complicates their life further and further rather than making their life simpler.
Right, and I think the other thing that's very, very challenging, and I know I faced it with my own parental situation, is that having, and I figure I'm one who certainly has some experience with the system, and I've still found it very frustrating, is having an individual with certain care needs, and I get a piece of information from this provider, a piece of information from this provider, a third from this provider, and they're conflicting. And they're not and none of them are talking to each other. So it's left up to the individual who is already facing some of their own crises or might have other things going on in their lives. To try and figure that out is very, very challenging. So we're really trying to put the onus back on the service delivery system here and the providers to better meet the needs of the individuals rather than the other way around, which is the way I think it's been.
Now, the people who are at this conference
Yes.
seem to be committed to the notion that individuals would prefer to have choice and they would prefer to make decisions themselves rather than to be placed in a box according to their needs. Do you agree with that?
Yes, but I think there's a balance to be stricken there. Absolutely, that we want to have a service system that I think meets individual needs and is flexible. So as your needs change, that you are actually, the service system is responsive to that. So if your needs change, it's not a month before you might get the services that you need. But I think we also have to bear in mind as we move forward in that direction that it's a service system that has limited resources, and we have to find some administrative efficiencies. So where do you strike the right balance in developing and trying to improve upon the system that doesn't have a system that's too administratively burdensome to administer, but it's certainly more responsive than the one we have now.
One of the unique aspects of these programs, in my view, is the involvement of the people who are users of the services.
Absolutely.
And I think that's imperative. If people are going to make choices, then they need to be involved in organizing the choices that they have to choose from.
Right.
And I think this program has done a great job, generally speaking, at involving people with disabilities. But that's something you have to keep teaching social workers and public servants and service providers to do, isn't it?
It's been it's interesting because I think we have to always talk about how to involve the consumer. But when we talk about consumer involvement, that really means many different things to many different people, and it's not just talking at the consumer about what the service system is, but really letting individuals who need services inform us about what those changes are and do so in a meaningful way. So our whatever we might do to change the system is reflective of that. But it's an ongoing challenge.
Well, Melissa, you're doing a wonderful job meeting these challenges, and I appreciate the opportunity to work with you, and certainly appreciate you being on Focus on Abilities today.
Well, thank you so much for having me, and it's wonderful working with you.
For our audience, the answer to the question we asked at the beginning, which federal program deals primarily in home and community-based services, it is Melissa's program in Medicaid at the Centers for Medicare Medicaid Services. I want to thank all of you for watching today. Our guest has been Melissa Hulbert from CMS. I'm Lex Frieden, your host, and I hope you'll join us next time for more Focus on Abilities.